All right, so we're gonna walk through the general deck building process. For me, at least, the first step is you want to determine the power level of your deck. How strong do you want it to be? And that's really important because you want to pick a commander that reflects that. But you also want to um, understand that going into it, so you know how much like ramp you want to build in, how many tutors you want to put in, stuff like that. So for this deck, I'm aiming to put it kind of like a maybe a mid range power level. Lord Windgrace does get targeted a lot because he tends to be pretty degenerate. So he's a little tricky to build, in any manner that's less than optimal. Because yeah, you're probably gonna get teamed up on. I've started building it already because I thought I was recording and I wasn't, and I just literally don't feel like going back at this point. I'm still gonna walk through each kind of block of themes that are in the deck, and then the individual card decisions up till this point. So first, whenever I build a deck, I always go with the core theme of the deck first. Like that's the focus of everything that I'm doing, is to make sure that I get that as strong as possible. Because when you have a deck, you want the core and you want the theme of the deck to be the focus. Um, if it's like an engine that's integral to the deck's function. In this case, it's really about playing extra lands and then bringing them back from the graveyard to the battlefield, um, as like the core, and then there are secondary effects that happen as a result of you doing those things. So by making your engine as finely tuned and broad as possible. And when I say broad, I mean just having a lot of different cards in the deck that enable it. It makes it so that you can really keep the deck going consistently. Because you could have a great theme to a deck, but not enough cards enabling it or keeping that running, and then your deck's just going to kind of fizzle. So the cards that are first going to be central to that theme, I'm going to focus on the bringing stuff back from the graveyard, lands from the graveyard. So obviously we have Lord Windgrace as the first thing that does it. Crucible of Worlds allows you to play lands from your graveyards. That's an auto include. Life from the Loam, you return 3 lands from your graveyard to your hand. That one's extremely important. We have Ramunap Excavator over here. What? Why? Oh, no, stop. Don't do anything. Where'd it go? All right, we have Ramunap Excavator over here, which is allowing you to play lands from your graveyard. We have World Shaper, which brings all lands back from your graveyard to the battlefield when it dies. And then we also have Tilling Treefolk, which returns lands from your graveyard to your hand on ETB. So this is a slightly less powerful version. Let me rephrase that. This is a much less powerful version of Titania. But I don't own Titania, and I'm trying to keep this deck to cards that I actually own. So I think you can get away without using Titania. Um, I was yawning, sorry. But if you're gonna run cards like Tilling Treefolk, you may want to consider ways to recur it. Otherwise it's probably not going to be as valuable. So those are the cards that return lands from the graveyard to the battlefield or to your hand. And then the next, and probably I would argue even slightly more important engine for the deck, is going to be the actual playing additional lands. So we have Azusa, Lost But Seeking, who allows you to play 2 additional lands on each of your turns. She's pretty much the best version of that in this deck. Courser Crufix allows you to play lands from the top of your library, which is good, and it also has a landfall trigger of gaining 1 life, which is fairly irrelevant, but in long grindy games can make a difference. Dryad of the Elysian Grove is literally just one of the best green cards in EDH. It should be in every green EDH deck, and it should be in every single deck that runs green that is EDH. And I would say there's probably no exception to that rule at all. So we have that card. Next we have Oracle of Moldiah, which allows you to run to play an additional land each turn. And you can play lands from the top of your library as well. So that's pretty cool. Gitrog Monster allows you to play an additional land each turn. And he's also extremely powerful in this deck because he allows you to draw a card whenever a land is put into your graveyard. He also is a sacrifice outlet for lands. It is a upkeep trigger that enables, so you can't just pile them all into it. But he does provide value on on multiple fronts. And then Wayward Swordtooth as well allows you to play additional land each turn. You could probably cut the Swordtooth if you're finding that it's a little bit expensive and it's pretty redundant. Exploration is really, really solid, and we're also going to be putting in Burgeoning as well, just to add to that. I was on the fence about it, but I think ultimately I do want to put Burgeoning in the deck. Yeah. Because it allows you to get lands out there at instant speed, or I shouldn't say at instant speed. It allows you to get lands out onto the battlefield when it's not your turn, which can be a significant advantage. So Burgeoning is going to go in the deck as well. I can't stop yawning. And that's pretty much it for the cards that allow you to play extra lands. So next we're going to go look at the secondary effects of this deck. So basically cards that are going to be triggered by your engine, which is in this case is primarily going to be cards that have landfall. So your first one is going to be Avenger of Zendikar. I think everybody knows this card. This thing is just disgusting. It creates a ton of tokens when it enters, and it quickly powers up your army of tokens. So that card 100% needs to be in the deck. Evolution Sage, which is a slightly non-traditional approach. It has the landfall proliferate ability, which with your commander is extremely good because your commander is mostly going to be subtracting counters in order to return lands from the graveyard to the battlefield. So this allows him to keep going without having to take as many turns plussing. Obviously his +2 ability is really solid as well. So it's not like it's bad to use, but it's nice. Also with this landfall trigger, the proliferate will allow you to quickly start using his ultimate and possibly multiple times. Next we have Lotus Cobra, which is landfall and mana ramp in the same card. This thing also gets out of hand really quickly. Awesome card. You definitely need to run it. Obnixilis, he's kind of a no. Oh, we skipped Mina and Den. They also allow you to play additional lands. And they actually, so they're really good because they allow you to play additional lands, but they also allow you to return lands to your hand, which allows you to keep getting landfall triggers going, which is obviously really nice. Obnixilis the Fallen, he's really good, but to be honest, I think I own one, but if I can't find it, I'm just going to cut it. He is really good, don't get me wrong, but he's kind of more of a narrow card than I don't want to say broad, but like he targets a single player at a time, and yes, he can become a big smashy face creature, but big smashy face creatures in EDH rarely actually connect. I do have something in here to kind of change that, but overall I think it's going to be, he's kind of like an all your eggs in one basket type of card. And also, like, if players see you start like siphoning 3 life per landfall trigger from one of their opponents, they're more likely to start targeting you. So this deck, I'm kind of trying to build it to be able to take on multiple players at once rather than one player at a time, and that's where I think Obnixilis doesn't quite fit. So next we have Omnath, Locus of Rage. As far as landfall goes, this guy's like he's like that fillet, like he's like pretty solid. Solid and fillet doesn't, that's a terrible analogy. Just ignore my terrible metaphor. I dropped my pen. I was twirling it and I dropped it. So Omnath, this guy's nuts. You better win the game when you play him, because he's going to put like the biggest target on your back that you can possibly imagine. His card is terrifying, but it's also extremely powerful. Ravaging Baloths. Despite all of its years in EDH, this card still goes overlooked. I don't know why. But this card just does not get the threat assessment, at least in a lot of playgroups that I've seen, that it deserves. This thing lets you go wide, and it lets you make an army of blockers. It really has like very little downside other than its mana cost, which is not a downside in this deck. And then we have the Retreat to Hagra. Again, it's a landfall. It drains everybody, and then you gain life. So that's one thing that is nice about it. It feels a little bit less targeted, and it's also only doing 1 life each time, which is less scary to people than 3 life like Obnix. It's still a pretty solid card, and I think worth running. Zendikar's Royal, I would say, in general, this card isn't that good. But because I'm trying to make this deck be able to fight multiple people at once, being able to quickly churn out elemental, or quickly churn out tokens, I think is valuable. So I'm gonna run it, but if I were trying to make this deck really competitive, I wouldn't run this card in the deck. I would be running either like a Mana Crypt or something else, like fast mana in its place, or something a little bit more degenerate, like some sort of land destruction card. So yeah, Zendikar's Royal, it's fine for my build, but yeah, you don't necessarily need to run it. And then of course, we have Colony's Heart Expedition as well. That one's pretty straightforward. It's ramp with landfall. Next, we have I'm gonna go kind of through like the oddballs. So Entomb it definitely looks kind of strange in this deck, but because Lord Windgrace allows you to return lands from your graveyard to the battlefield, this card works really well because you could just entomb a land that you needed. Same reason why you want to run Realms Uncharted, because it allows you to look for lands that you can get both to your hand and your graveyard. Crop rotations affect, it's a land tutor as well. And just because you sacrifice the land isn't bad in this deck because of Lord Windgrace again. So, these are kind of a mix of like rampy tutors, but they all function very well in the deck because of the, the deck's engine. I run both Anger and Filth in this deck. And yes, those are kind of strange cards. Again, this deck isn't CEDH. It's just meant to be kind of like a mid-range power level, and that's why I'm running them. It allows you to win games out of nowhere, especially Filth. Because Filth gives your creatures... it gives your creatures Swamp Walk. I'm straight dying over here. Yawning and coughing. Horrible stuff. I don't even know why. So, Filth. Actually, it's probably allergies. You run Urborg in this deck, so like it's a Jund deck that also runs Urborg. You're making a ton of creatures, especially some big creatures. So Filth allows you to just straight like walk, like Swamp Walk, right? So like just get past everything. I don't think anybody even really plays it in this deck, but you really should. Like people like do not place enough value on like Land Walk, especially like Swamp Walk and Forest Walk in EDH are really good. They're just really good. Like Trample's cool, but how about like unblockable creatures instead of Trample? So yeah, they're in here. Anger is very like take it or leave it. He may not even make the final cut when I'm cutting stuff at the end of this deck. We have Dredge Cards, so Stinkweed Imp and Golgari Grave Troll. I don't think you want to go that much heavier on the Dredge, because like this one dredges 5 and Stinkweed and so Golgari Grave Troll dredges 6. Like that's a lot. Even in a 100 card deck, that's plenty, because you'd never want to overcommit to your graveyard when people could exile it, right? So I think that you really want to just leave it at these two. If you really need, because you also have Life from the Loam. Like if you want to really go heavy into that Dredge theme, then there's actually several other cards you're gonna have to add to this deck that I have not included and I'm not planning to include in this list to help protect your graveyard. Cards like Gaia's Blessing, to shuffle target cards back into your library in the event that they try and nuke your graveyard. So it's kind of a different deck if you're going to go heavier into Dredge, and I personally don't really like it. We also have Turn Timber Sower in here. It synergizes with Avenger of Zendikar, and it also is just a really great way to protect like against land destruction. And of course, when you have cards that allow you or make you sacrifice lands, then this card gets even better. So yeah, I think you run that. And then for ramp, it's kind of your standard ramp package of Cultivate Kadama's Reach. Where is it? Yeah, the Expedition Harrow. Just kind of your standard land ramp. So that's everything I've got so far that I hadn't gone over. And so now I'm just going to actually start going back into the, card by card, picking and discussion for this deck, right? All right. So the next card I think you really want to be considering, and we're still on the ramp theme right now. So I think you should at least consider either either Elvis Reclaimer or possibly what's it called? So it depends on So it depends on how your mana base is going to be built. If you know you're going to have a lot of basics, then Explosive Vegetation is a really solid choice. But if you're not going to have a ton of basics, even though it's not quite ramp, I think Elvish Reclaimer is really good because it allows you to search for a land and put it onto the battlefield. And actually, so that one, obviously, I'm going to be running that one. I'm not planning to do a ton of basic lands in the deck. I'm not going to be doing the, what's it called? I'm not going to be doing the Valakut, burn theme in the deck with like Scape Shift and everything like that. You absolutely can. I'm simply not going to. So I'm kind of on the fence about adding Scape Shift to the deck. The reason I don't want to add Scape Shift is because when you add Scape Shift, it automatically starts kind of narrowing the deck construction, narrowing the theme. You put in Scape Shift, you have to put in the cards that combo with it. Otherwise, it's kind of just like a value play that dumps stuff into your graveyard and could like result in you losing half your deck if your graveyard gets exiled. So I'm going to shy away from Scape Shift. Yes, it's good. Yes, it's viable. In a more competitive deck, I think it's extremely necessary. But for now, I don't want to put Scape Shift in the deck. All right. So we've got a little bit of ramp in the deck so far. We do want to add a little bit more ramp. It is a land deck. Land's your big resource. So your next question is how much more you want to go into the dredgy type ramp versus the non-dredgy. I don't really want to go into the dredgy ramp. I kind of want to stick with like the more traditional ramp. So we are going to go, we're definitely going to throw in, what's it called? We're going to throw in Farseek because this one helps you with your land, like your mana fixing. So Farseek's going to go in there. Also, I think it's kind of optional. I'm a fan of Far Wanderings in this deck. In fact, so Threshold cards in general are interesting in this deck, but I definitely like Far Wanderings. I'll show you in a second. Most people don't really know this one, I think. Oh, it looks like it was in the Commander deck, so I guess people do know this card now. It's originally from Planeshift. Anyway, so Threshold, it basically lets you search for 3 basics and put them into the battlefield tapped instead. So I'm going to put Far Wanderings in here because it's really easy to enable Threshold. Even without a heavy dredge theme, it's very easy to get Threshold up and running. Other options, Explore is pretty good. I almost wouldn't run Explore for the simple reason that it's getting a little bit down into this is kind of like a design philosophy thing. Okay, so in EDH, Explorer is really good in this deck, and Explorer is really good in a lot of decks. But the one thing you want to always watch out for is, especially for a more slow-paced deck, which this is kind of being geared towards, cards like Explore are nice because they do multiple things, right? But if you could find a card that does Explore's effect, but maybe does double the effect, but costs double, you want to do that. And I should be a little more clear. Each card that you play in EDH, you want to have a significant impact on the board. Explorer obviously does, so anything I was saying bad about Explorer before, that was, ignore that. You want each card to have a significant impact on the board, because, like, at a certain point in the game, you're going to have a handful of cards that are kind of dead. Lord Windgrace does a nice job of getting rid of cards that are dead late game because it allows you to discard cards and then draw cards. It also allows you to discard dead land draws later on in the game, which is kind of just another thing that makes it so valuable. So yeah, Explorer is really solid in this deck. It fits in your theme of playing extra lands. The only thing I just didn't really like about it as much is simply the fact that, like, if you look at a card like Explorer versus Scapeshift in terms of power level, Scapeshift for its mana cost is way better than Explorer is. But you know, again, we're looking at like early game ramp right now, and Explorer's fine. All right, so we do want to choose between either Skyshroud Claim or what is it called? Skyshroud Claim or Explosive Vegetation. I know I said I wasn't running a ton of basics, but Skyshroud Claim is even more restrictive, so we'll stick with the Explosive Vegetation now. Originally I wasn't going to run it, but then I'm thinking back to what I actually have in the deck in terms of ramp, and I think we're going to run it. I don't think I'm going to run this with Skyshroud. And then, of course, you're going to want Sylvan Scrying. I think Sylvan Scrying. That's the Lantern. Yeah, you want to have Sylvan Scrying. That's like a no-brainer. Search for land, put it into your hand. You know, you definitely need to have that. Okay, so we've kind of gone through the ramp. I think at this point I'm pretty solid on ramp. All right, you know what it was? So Rampant Growth versus Explore. I would run Explore over Rampant Growth almost any day. Explore is pretty much just, you know, it does so much more in a single card than Rampant Growth does. Same with like what's it called? Nature's Lore. All right. I'm trying to think. Deck construction. I guess, all right. So since I'm planning on running more non-basics, actually, we are going to cut Explosive Vegetation. I know I just said I was keeping it in here, but here's why. So you're gonna want to run Nature's Lore, because anything that searches for land type versus basic land allows you to get fetch lands and dual lands, which we're going to be having in the deck. I just straight like wasn't even remembering the fact that I'm planning on doing that. I was still thinking of making like a very casual mana base, but I don't think I really want to go down that road. So you want to run Skyshroud Claim as well, because this one allows you to search for named lands, in this case being forests. So both those cards allow you to get basically any dual or shock land that you needed, which is, you know, just extremely powerful for you. Outside of that, I think, yeah, I really do think we're done with ramp though at this point. I've really gone kind of deep into it, and I don't think I want to go that much further down the ramp road. All right. So next, we're going to be looking at, I guess we're probably going to do the sack outlets. So there's a couple reasons why you want to sacrifice lands in this deck, right? One is to be able to, if you don't have a land in your hand, sacrifice a land, return it from your graveyard to your hand, and then play it again to get landfall triggers. But also, like, if people do anything, if people are starting to like destroy your lands a lot, the ability to sacrifice them and get a beneficial effect before they destroy it is nice. Before it actually gets destroyed is nice. So that's another reason you want to kind of consider it. But the bigger reason really just comes down to keeping your landfall engine going. That's really the main reason I would say you want to be sacrificing lands. So you could run like Zurin Orb. You can run like Sylvan Safekeeper. I'm probably going to skip them in this deck. I don't know. I don't really like them that much in this deck, but we'll see. Horn of Greed. So, after we go sack outlets, so like ignore that part. Next we're going to go to card draw. And in this deck, even with your commander having his +2 like that, you're still going to want to have some sort of card draw. I think I like Horn of Greed a lot because your opponents benefit from it, which makes it it makes it less desirable for them to destroy it, and it also makes it a little bit more politically polarizing when somebody does decide to destroy it, as long as they aren't able to convince people that you are abusing it. Because a lot of people, especially if they're in like red or like red, black, or green, like similar to you, if they're in any of those colors, card draw is going to be, or white. God forbid someone's mono white. I love mono white decks. I do, but guys, I mean, good luck with drawing cards. Oh, but you do have that new Mangara commander that just came out. He seems pretty sick. Anyway, so the benefit here of playing something like Horn of Greed, again, it comes down to the fact that it's threatening, but not as immediately threatening as like a what do we have? Like Sylvan Library. People are gonna look at Sylvan Library. Oh, he plays Sylvan Library. Like he plays expensive cards and stuff like that. Whereas Horn of Greed is like, oh, like this is for everybody. Yeah, I don't know. I think you want to run it. Other things for card draw would be stuff that, you know, kind of just like looting effects. So I guess while we're on the topic of looting effects, you'll want like Faithless Looting. That one's like kind of simple decision. I'm not a huge fan of Faithless Looting for the simple reason that it's it kind of falls into that like cheap card, low power category. Like yes, Faithless Looting is really good, but shouldn't you just run a tutor instead? Like just run Demonic Tutor instead of Faithless Looting? Yeah, generally speaking, it's going to be better. You know, if your power level of all your cards across the board is so high that anything you draw is always good, then I would say Faithless Looting is probably better. I'm just going to run Faithless Looting because it's like easily accessible to a lot of players, you know, who will be watching this. And it's also something that I know exactly where I'm going to go find it in my boxes. So that's pretty cool. All right. So I guess from here is where you start to really branch off in your deck theme. And this is where like the customization starts to really come into play. Because the core of the deck is kind of fleshed out at this point. I do want to add a little bit more card draw, which I will get to through more of like my specific card choices. So, you know, we're not going to quite see it yet, but I do think, you know, now you start to get into the realm of like just like really specific card customization. The first place I'm going to go is, personally, I think you want to have a decent amount of removal. So immediately, first card that comes to mind, Pernicious Deed. Any deck that's got black and green in it, you want to have Pernicious Deed. This card's just so powerful. You're going to want Pernicious Deed. I know it's old-fashioned, but I like Putrefy. And one of the biggest reasons Putrefy is so good is because any spell that is multimodal is so crucial. Putrefy hits both artifacts and creatures, which makes it strictly better than a card that just kills creatures or just kills artifacts. You always want to have cards that are flexible in EDH, and this card, you know, epitomizes that. On the topic of Putrefy, depending on how much mana you want to be getting your removal spells, you know, into, another option you could do is like, it's a newer card, Casualties of War, right? This is kind of like, it's like Decimate, but I think it hits Planeswalkers too, right? Artifact, creature, enchantment, land, Planeswalker, yeah. So Casualties of War, I think you gotta have it in this deck. It can be really good late game, really game-changing late game, especially. Maelstrom Pulse is extremely good because it hits permanents. Sorry, it hits non-land permanents, so you want to have Maelstrom Pulse. It hits Planeswalkers, which we don't like. And then, let's see. I guess I would also just recommend running Decimate as well. This is kind of your standard removal suite. And now we can start deciding how much further down that removal path we want to go, right? So if you really think, you know, you want to go further, one of the easiest ones I'd recommend is just your standard black board wipe, so Damnation. I don't think I'm going to put Damnation in here yet. Not 100% sure. I think I want to keep it a little bit more on theme still. So while, yes, Damnation would be really good, I'm actually going to go with Beast Within, simply because it hits permanents, very important. to have, did it add? It did not add. Okay, so Beast Within is incredibly important. And then actually a little bit of a weird choice. It's not weird in this deck, but just weird in general, I think. Unless people do play this card a lot. Maybe they do, who knows. But Death Sprout actually synergizes pretty nicely with this deck. It's slow, so that's the biggest argument against it. If I were to say, is Death Sprout better at 4 mana than Damnation is at 4 mana? The answer is absolutely not. Damnation is way better, so you should run Damnation instead. But, you know, we're keeping this a little bit, you know, a little bit reasonable. The other thing that I'd say, removal-wise, that can be kind of, you know, you could run like Abrupt Decay. I would say if you're making this a little bit more of a fast CEDH type deck, I would run Abrupt Decay, but in this deck, I'm trying to not focus on winning, you know, by turn 4. So I don't think Abrupt Decay is going to be as good. I'm intentionally skipping the tutors like Demonic, Vampiric, Grim, all that stuff. I'm skipping them as well. I think Croson Grip. Croson Grip's really important in this deck because a lot of the cards that negatively impact graveyards are artifacts and enchantments. So being able to have Croson Grip and Split Second, you know, on that Croson Grip is massive. I know that people have kind of shied away from playing Croson Grip and they play like, what's it called? The one that ETB destroys all artifacts and enchantments instead. I can't even think of the name. I run it in decks too, and I can't think of the name. Anyway, but I think you really want to have a Croson Grip in there. So I'm trying to think what else are we even really missing. I mean, if you go further down the removal route, then you're gonna get into stuff like Acidic Slime, Rexage. You're gonna probably go with like a you could go like Terminate. Then the one that destroys creature and planeswalker, it's a sorcery. I can't think of it off the top of my head. But again, those are all kind of getting like a little bit too narrow after the ones that are like a little bit more diverse in what they can hit. So I think, you know, the one glaring flaw of this deck at this point is certainly going to be board wipes. I would say Chain Reaction, if you don't want to buy Damnation or don't have Damnation, Chain Reaction is like definitely your next best option. And I'm going to run it as well. I think Chain Reaction is worth running. But Damnation, you know, certainly... I guess the benefit of running Chain Reaction instead of running Damnation is that you may have situations where you have several very large tokens that Chain Reaction won't kill, but will would have otherwise been killed by Damnation. So I love Chain Reaction in EDH generally, and I think in this deck it definitely has a pretty safe spot. All right, that puts it at 55 cards. So we're gonna start the deck off at 63-37. I'm not sure if I really want to keep it at that ratio, but we're gonna keep it there. So again, we start going a little bit even more narrow now into how we want this deck theme to play out. At this point, if you're going to be adding 8 cards, if you want to make the deck a little bit more competitive, I'd say put in 8 tutors. Let me rephrase that. I'd say put in maybe 5 tutors and then Mana Crypt, Mana Vault, Soul Ring. You know, we're gonna put in Soul Ring anyway though. I think, you know, that one you really just want to have no matter what. I would say with this card becoming so accessible and just so ubiquitous, like ubiquitous, whatever. You need to have it in your deck because everybody else is gonna have it in your deck, and the disadvantage you're gonna be at if everybody else plays a Soul Ring or half your opponents play Soul Ring turn 1 and you just don't even have it in your deck, so you couldn't. You know, that really, you know, that's really rough. For me personally, I'm just going to flesh this deck out with a little bit, a couple more removal cards. I do actually want to just continue on like with the Rexage theme of wanting to be able to hit artifacts and enchantments. So we're going to do that at the very least. And then for the last 6 slots, when I look at this deck, my first thought is that it's a little bit low on um, getting things back from the graveyard that aren't lands. Um, so I kind of I'm thinking like you probably want like maybe like an Eternal Witness. Um, I think we want to run Eternal Witness in this deck. Most green decks want to run Eternal Witness anyway. But I think that we really do need to have it in here. I don't really see any like big like bomb spells, so to speak, that would like haymakers that can end the game. And so I think you want to be able to at least have that in the deck as well. Um, I'm not going to go the land destruction route. Like I said, you certainly can. So you can run like Jockle Hops or Obliterate. You could definitely run both those cards. Because if you have your commander out, you're immediately going to be at a significant advantage after all those cards, after everything else on the board has been destroyed, artifacts, creatures, lands. It's just not the playstyle I want to go for. It's not the type of game that I want to have. It's not, fun for me. So we're not going to use it. But yeah, I think, we're going to want to be able to have a little bit more of an ability to, both interact with opponents and also, close out the game. So I'm trying to think of what are some other cards that are going to fit that category. Obviously the first thing that's going to come to mind is going to be X spells. So X spells are pretty straightforward. Probably maybe like an overrun type effect. Overrun effects are always pretty solid, especially in a go wide theme. Trying to think. Yeah, okay. So I see. All right, I hate Torment of Hellfire too. I really hate that card. So I'm not gonna play it in my deck. It's like one of the best black X spells out there. I'm not gonna do it. I think where I'm gonna take this deck now is actually I'm gonna take it kind of back towards a little bit more of a creature theme. So is it strictly worse than Rampaging Bailouts? Yes. No, I can't. I want to, but I can't. So Bailout Woodcrasher is very tempting, but no, we're not going to do that. You could run like Nyx Bloom Ancient if you want to go kind of like start getting kind of wild. I'm not going to do it, but you definitely could. Living Twister. That's the one from, oh my god, is that War of the Spark it was from? I think it's from War of the Spark. It's from the new Ravnica set anyway. That one allows you to pitch lands to deal damage to things. Seismic Assault, which is actually one of my favorite cards, or it was one of my favorite decks back in Shadowmoor, was Seismic Swans. So you could run stuff like that. I do think you want to avoid running like the really big creatures. Just because it's just so easy for them to get killed. You want stuff that can like you want to be able to easily rebuild your army again, if somebody wipes the board. All right, so Constant Miss. This one's you absolutely need to have Constant Miss in the deck. There's like no exception to that rule. It's one of the most important cards in your deck. And I think because one of the best ways to kill this deck is to take that Constant Miss out, consider Rift Sweeper. The negative of putting Rift Sweeper in this deck, and the reason I may not add it yet, is we're not running a ton of tutors, so you're not going to be able to consistently grab Rift Sweeper to save yourself from your Constant Miss getting exiled. So again, that's kind of the downside of making this deck less consistent with tutors. But it is a design choice, that everybody gets to make, and unfortunately, the design choice I'm going to make is that. I like Lavalanche a lot, because it's like not as, it doesn't feel as bad as just hitting everybody with an Exsanguinate for a ton, or like Torment of Hailfire for like, 50 or whatever. Um, but it does fall into the one-sided territory, so you know you kind of have to be careful with that. Um, yeah, I don't know. Closing this deck up is a little tricky, because normally you would just fill it in with a couple more tutors and stuff like that and call it a day. But I'd really rather keep the deck a little bit more interesting. Um, let's see. I wish Primeval Titan were legal in EDH. I can understand why he's not, but it doesn't mean I can't wish that he were legal in EDH. Yeah, I really don't know. What else I want to add? I'd love to do some sort of like, I'd love to do like a cycling theme here, but that's not really an option without Astral Slide or Astral Drift. All right, I mean, I guess we're just gonna close this up with a little bit, try and get a little bit more card draw in here. Um, I think that's a pretty safe place to go. I know that the deck doesn't really have a ton yet, so that's probably the best route to go at this point. Probably a little bit more creature control, or like board wipes, a few more board wipes, and then yeah, just some more card draw. So next one, I want to say probably Savage Twister. There's something that just feels nice about casting X spells. You know, normally you wouldn't be playing that thing, but in this case, you're definitely going to. You could play stuff that like animates lands to attack. And now we're gonna skip Exsanguinate. I guess we'll probably stick with at least like one tutor for creatures. I think Green Sun is probably the way I'd like to go, just because it's gonna put them onto the battlefield. So if you had like Rex Sage, Eternal Witness, they're both gonna benefit from that immediately. What else do we want to even put in here? Again, I'm trying to keep it away from like the really messy stuff. Like the really broken stuff. Really want to keep it away from that. Well, all right. So for the next two cards, for now, we're just gonna be like really boring. We're gonna throw in a Chaos Warp, because again, you can use it to hit planeswalkers. You can use it to hit like nasty enchantments and artifacts that are causing you trouble. And then I think I'm going to just add in, and you don't see him often anymore either, but I'm going to put in Genesis. I love Genesis, and there's enough creatures in the deck that have good abilities especially good ETB abilities, that I really want to have him in here. Otherwise you can just start losing all your stuff into the graveyard, and it gets really weird. So the biggest vulnerability this deck has right now is going to be Graveyard Hate. For my playgroup, I don't need to protect against it, but for the sake of, I guess, other people, let me go over a couple options. So if we're talking Graveyard Hate, I would cut the Zendikar's Royal. We'll probably just slot in the Rift Sweeper first off. Yeah, we'll just do the Rift Sweeper just for starters, because Rift Sweeper provides, especially with Genesis, it provides the ability to keep doing it. And it also is kind of like, even if you try and do things that give yourself Shroud or give yourself Hexproof, those cards will eventually be destroyed. So like you don't want to rely too much on them. Whereas Rift Sweeper is just going to immediately bring that card, back into your library. Yeah, it doesn't go to your hand; it goes to your library. Yes, it's not preventative. So if you have a playgroup that's really aggressively hitting your, hitting your graveyard, then consider putting in like I think was it Witchbane Orb from Innistrad, which I think it gives you hexproof. You could play. I want to say Ground Seal. Is Ground Seal? Cards in graveyards can't be the target of spells or abilities, and that's literally not what you want. Okay, so ignore that. Anyway, that's something you would use against this deck, though. Okay. So yeah, just kind of going through again. So I guess to wrap up the deck building process, the core is going to be pretty similar, I think, for a lot of these decks. And then it's going to be like the more specific things you want to do that are going to change. This deck is definitely not designed to be super competitive. And over time, I think I will end up just making it more competitive because I'm going to start getting sick of people piling on and freaking out and seeing as lower Windgrace. So it means I'll probably take it down the land destruction route. I'll start putting in some of them, like the more like bomb, so to speak, creatures, like Titania, or I guess even like Multani's pretty solid. He gets +1/+1 for each land. I believe that you control and each one in your graveyard. So he's pretty he can be pretty scary. But yeah, otherwise, I mean, again, this deck is really just going to be focused on, oh, okay, you know what? One more. And this is actually good because it shuffles stuff back into your library a little bit. And it also can protect you against mill, which if you have mill in your playgroup, then I guess you want this. Otherwise, you don't. I'm not going to be putting Gaia's Blessing in here just because I don't want to hold it in my hand all game waiting for it to do something for me. So like, are there other cards that are better options than Gaia's Blessing? Yeah, the first one, of course, is going to be Elixir of Immortality. And this is basically in the event that you're in a kind of a longer grindy game where you just, you're at risk of, decking yourself, then Elixir of Immortality is going to, really come into play. So right now, this deck is relying pretty heavily on Lord Windgrace for card draw, which is one kind of glaring flaw. But in the same respect, with the combination of Dredge Cards, and then just the fact that with Lord Windgrace, the first time you play him, he's probably going to stick for at least a turn or two to help kind of draw you stuff. I think it's going to be enough. I am going to actually cut Faithless Looting and put in Phyrexian Arena. Because I like that a little bit more for card draw. I think, this deck especially, you really want to have as many cards that consistently provide you a trickle of cards than like one-off uses like Faithless Looting. So now we're going to actually go and we're going to sort by CMC, I hope. There we go. Okay. Oh, we didn't. All right, we do have to. We'll go over the lands as well. Yeah, we will have to go over the lands. Okay. So if you look at the curve of the deck, it's pretty good. You have a couple bombs kind of down the bottom. And it curves out right around 3, which for EDH is fine. We have decent amount of ramp. I'm not seeing too many issues here. So one card that's going to be specific really more to this deck is going to be Buried Alive. there's a decent amount of creatures in this deck, and Buried Alive, it can get Genesis into the graveyard for you. It gets Anger and Filth into the graveyard for you. So I think you want to run Buried Alive. What are we going to cut for it? My first thought is probably Death Sprout. You know what? I'm going to cut Obnixilis. I don't really like it. It's a good card, so I'm not cutting it because it's bad. I just don't really like it as far as the theme of this deck goes. If I were running like Scapeshift in here, yes, I'd be running that then as well. Because that one can, it could kill one person off of a single Scapeshift. But for now, I think again we're trying to just keep the deck focused around that engine and kind of getting value out of it. So for now, I mean, this is pretty much the final version of what I'm going to run. The curve's pretty solid. A lot of the cards in the deck, again, like I said, I was trying to stick with multimodal removal spells, things like Putrefy. I don't mind that a lot of the removal stuff kind of falls into the 3-4 mana category. Instead of like the super efficient 1 mana like Nature's Claim type card, because this deck isn't trying to be so competitive. I didn't put Splendid Reclamation into the deck, but I'm gonna add it right now. That was kind of one of those like save for the ends, look at the deck and see how we like it. And I think I'm actually gonna cut the Wayward Swordtooth. I don't think I need that many additional land card effects in the deck. Maybe I'm going to end up regretting that. But for now, I kind of just want to see how it goes. Because, I don't know. I don't know. I'm trying to keep this deck a little bit less powerful than it really can be. And I know that Wayward Swordtooth and more cards that provide additional mana or additional lands, that they can just kind of be problematic, and it can kind of like shape your play style. And it's like really hard to not just put a bunch of lands out, but it also is tempting to put them all out, and then you could overcommit to a board and have someone obliterate or whatever, and then you're kind of in a weird position, especially if your commander wasn't out. But yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I guess it's really just about measured restraint with building this deck, unless you want to make it super competitive. So for tools to help build decks, especially for new players, I think Tapped Out's a really solid resource, just to help visualize your deck. Again, this is what I would do on the table in front of me anyway. This is just allowing me to do it, on a computer. For newer players, EDH Rec is probably a good resource, because it would let you kind of just visualize what people tend to put in a deck with that commander. The downside is that you do need to make sure you understand why the card goes into the deck, and if there are other cards that have to go into the deck with that card for synergy reasons. Otherwise, you could end up having a bunch of dead cards that seem extremely underwhelming. That's kind of the only thing I would caution with EDH Rec. I guess to flesh out the lands, this is all going to be, again, kind of like specific. The ones that I think are like must-haves, like just absolute auto-includes in this deck. I think Field of the Dead, if it isn't banned, which I don't think it's banned, I think, Field of the Dead you gotta have. It makes zombie tokens. It literally just rewards you for playing Magic. That's all it does. And I personally hate it, and I hate cards that do that. But I think you just have to run it. If you really want to start getting into that mean Magic player territory, then Strip Mine. You can play it. I'm gonna play Strip Mine as well, but not for the purpose of just destroying everybody's lands and grinding the game out. Simply because I think that there are some lands that can grind the game to too much of a halt, that you really just don't want to allow them to stick on the board, because it makes it unfun for everybody. One of those being Glacial Chasm. So you got to run Glacial Chasm in this deck. It's one of the best lands in the deck. Um, Unfortunately, it also kind of makes the game not fun. Um, so for me, I'm gonna put it in here because if I start getting really like heavily targeted by people, I'll put it out there and just use it to try and survive. Um, I don't know. It's pretty hypocritical to play it, but hey, you know what? It is what it is at this point. I'm not running a lot of the other degenerate stuff, so let me play some Magic, I guess. Um, you could run like Cabal Coffers. Um, I don't because I'm not running a bunch of like the X mana sinks like Exsanguinate and Torment of Hellfire. I'm not gonna bother running Cabal Coffers. But yes, you absolutely could. Um, some of the really fun things, and I wish this card had been reprinted, but it hasn't been. Vesuva. So Vesuva hasn't been reprinted. I'm not going to throw it in here because I've sold all my Vesuvas. I thought they were going to get reprinted, so I dumped a bunch of them, and then of course they ended up not getting reprinted. So I felt kind of dumb. Um, yeah, I don't know. Volrath's Stronghold. I'm definitely going to put in here because I own several, so that's not an issue. Um, it allows you to bring creatures back to the top of your deck, so I think you really just want to be able to do that. Um, if you think your commander is going to get killed too much, then there's a land that puts your commander back from the command zone into your hand. Um, I don't remember exactly what it's called. Command. It's not Command Tower. It's something like that though. Okay, so speaking of which, Command Tower. Um, Command Tower is pretty straightforward. I would say Kessig Wolf Run is fun. And the thing I love about this card so much is that you can target any creature. It doesn't have to be your own. So it's a political tool. You can use it to take advantage of somebody else's powerful creature to get somebody else killed. So I really like Kessig Wolf Run. Maze of Ith, I think you really want to consider having in here because of the amount of heat you're going to get. You probably would want to run like what's it called? Yeah. So so I was talking about Vesuva before. You want to run at least Thespian Stage or Vesuva. You want to have at least one of those effects in here because you can keep sacrificing that land to try and get different, cards copied if you wanted to. So I don't see any reason not to just run that in this deck. Temple of the False God's pretty solid because it's pretty easy for you to get the 5 or more lands you need to activate it. I'm not going to throw it in here just out of personal preference, but it is it's definitely a solid card. Absolutely. I would say this isn't really budget, but if you have it, like Tabernacle is a pretty solid land in this deck. It kind of brings it a little bit more stacksy, so obviously you can say whether or not you really want to do it. I think my Tabernacle's it's probably in like Chainveil Teferi or something, so I don't think I really want to bother moving it between decks, and it's not necessary really. It's just annoying. So one other thing you could actually run in this deck is you could run like Manlands, because it's pretty easy to get them back from the graveyard with your commander. One card I didn't put in here, which I'm just thinking of now, actually, is Chromatic Lantern. We're going to put Chromatic Lantern in. It's too good to not put in the deck. Let me think of what I'm going to cut, actually. This deck probably could actually just run 64-36 instead of 63-37. Yeah, because the curve's pretty low. I'm actually not going to cut anything, so we're just going to leave this. We're going to leave this at 64-36. So we need to add another 26 lands to the deck. Fetch lands are 100% your friend. I'm not going to flesh the rest of the deck out. At this point, we've kind of gone after like the main like utility lands, so to speak. Deck more salvage if you want to, I guess. But yeah, anyway. So you really want to run fetch lands because they give you landfall triggers. And they also help thin out your deck, so that you have a tendency to draw fewer land cards. But beyond that, I mean, the mana base is going to be pretty straightforward. Keep in mind that the way I built this deck certainly was with Skyshroud Claim and Nature's Lore, so I want to make sure to have several dual lands or lands with dual land typing in the deck that have forest typing, so that I can get them with Skyshroud Claim. Farseek obviously helps kind of get around that if you forget. But yeah, you don't want to forget that. You never want to search for land and fail to find. You could run like Ghost Quarter. You could run, you could run like Wasteland, if you wanted to, but I don't know. You really just have to decide how unfun you want this game to become, because it's really, really easy, to make this deck unfun. I think personally, I'm actually gonna add a couple manlands in, just for old time's sake. They're really not that good, other than the fact that they can survive board wipes and stuff like that. And if I were running more board wipes, then I'd put more manlands in. Raging Ravine is the first one that comes to mind. And then probably Treetop. I think probably Treetop Village. Those are the two I like the most as far as manlands go for this deck. What's the black red one? It's Lava Claw. I don't completely remember what it does actually. So I'm actually gonna I just want to look it up really quickly. Oh, it gets plus X plus O. Okay. Yeah, we can run it. That's fine. So we're gonna go with a couple manlands. But yeah, so there again, like I said, there's a couple routes you can go. You could go a little bit more into like the big creatures that eat lands, if you wanted to. You could go heavier into like the land destruction theme with like Obliterate and stuff like that, so that you can keep your commander up and then just like ruin everybody else's resources. Those are both viable strategies. I would say that, the Obliterate route is going to be more on the competitive side. Basically just Obliterate with a bunch of tutors, more fast mana with like mana rocks and stuff like that, so that you're able to easily, just play the same game over and over again, which is, boring, but hey, if that's your cup of tea, have fun. I think the only other thing I'm looking at this deck right now and seeing as being potentially bad is the fact that I don't have as many board wipes as I could. Throwing in Damnation, throwing in Chain Reaction, Chain Reaction's already in there. Blasphemous Act, throwing those in here, those are both solid options, and, I'm not going to say you shouldn't do it. Just tailor it to your playgroup. I think it's going to be more fun and amusing for me to run Filth and then like Swamp Walk into people. But hey, you know what? Whatever floats your boat. I'm going to playtest this deck a little bit, and then eventually I'm probably going to make a video talking about how the deck actually played and, what cuts I want to make. So it probably won't be for about a month or so, but, if you're interested, certainly keep an eye out. I'm also going to start making some more videos just about how to build decks, because I think it's extremely valuable for newer players, especially, to watch somebody build a deck, look at their thought process throughout the entire, I don't want to say process. I already said process. To let people watch it and see just, how people think, and how they make those decisions, those marginal, like looking for those marginal gains, and understand, how you want to cut cards, because cutting cards is a really tough thing in EDH. And the more cards that get printed, especially the more cards that get printed just for EDH, the tougher it is to cut cards. I know that. So hopefully this helps with that. The next deck that I'm planning on making is actually going to be a mono white deck, because there are a bunch of people in one of my group chats saying that red is better than white. Or sorry, no. They were saying that red is more powerful than white. And I don't really agree with that, honestly. I think that a mono red deck has a favorable matchup against other colors in EDH, more so than white does. But I think that overall white's spells and creatures are more powerful. And I think at this point I'm actually going to just make a video on this, because it was like there was just an all-out like brawl in our group chat over this one. Very polarizing discussion, which is why I'm going to have to be making this mono white deck. And what these guys don't realize is I'm going to be making a mono white deck, but I'm going to really take advantage of everything white has to offer, because these boys are going to be slotting up their mono red decks to try and beat my mono white deck. And there's a keyword white has that red doesn't have that much of, and that keyword is protection. So yeah, we'll see how that goes. Anyway, this was never intended to be a short video, so please don't whine about the fact that it's an hour long. To be honest, when I make an EDH deck, I typically spend 3 or 4 hours making it and really doing a lot. So this deck, this deck building actually went pretty quick, mostly because I've been thinking about this deck for a long time, and finally decided to get Lord Windgrace. And I had a friend who had a deck, and I kind of got to see different things in it. So again, let me know your thoughts. And also, if you have a deck that you would like me to critique, let me know. Post the video, or sorry, post like your deck list on maybe like Tapped Out or something, and I can definitely take a look at it and critique it for you. Just let me use it in a video, and we can go through that process. I definitely don't mind doing that. I've been playing Magic since 2006, and I've been playing EDH since probably about 2007. So, wow, that's a long time. Okay. Anyway, don't get coronavirus, guys, and don't get killed by police. Bye.